Hi, I'm Neil.
And I'm John.
And you're listening to World of Telly, the podcast where John and I watch every single TV programme ever made in no particular order. And what are we watching this week, John?
Today we're watching Whoops Apocalypse.
For anyone unfamiliar with this programme, Whoops Apocalypse is a hard-hitting six-part documentary series about the geopolitical climate in 2025, which is remarkable considering it was originally broadcast on Sunday evenings on ITV in March and April of 1982. It features appearances from John Cleese, Barry Morse, John Barron, Alexei Sayle and Peter Jones. It was directed by John Reardon, produced by Humphrey Barclay and written by Andrew Marshall and David Renwick. So, John, it's 1982. What the hell was going on?
Well, it was a particularly bad point of the Cold War.
Yes.
It was actually sometimes called the Second Cold War. You had the leader of the Soviet Union, Leonid Brezhnev, I won't do the Russian too much, had been in power since 1964, and he didn't actually die until after Whoops Apocalypse. And he was very much perceived as being this sort of ancient, kind of stolid
walking corpse.
Absolutely a walking corpse. And then, of course, Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980 and took power in January 1981. And I just remember my parents and my parents' generation finding this so perplexing, because Reagan was basically an actor who'd been in terrible B movies. It was their equivalent of Trump being elected, really. And Reagan was based in California, but was a Republican, and he was famously the governor of California and set his stall against student protest and was seen as very right-wing, and basically was elected after various disasters that had befallen Jimmy Carter. And during the Jimmy Carter presidency, that was continuing what was known as détente between the Soviet Union and the USA. And there were various arms control agreements known as the SALT treaties. But then that all started to crumble when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in December 1979. Obviously, Thatcher had been elected. She was very hawkish about the Soviet Union. Reagan was elected, as I've already mentioned. And basically, kind of rapidly, they developed the worst relations between the Soviet Union and America since the Cuban Missile Crisis. You know, there was the Iranian Revolution, and there was the hostage situation in Iran, where basically Carter tried to send in troops to liberate them, and it all went disastrously wrong. But the Ayatollah had taken over, leading to a lot of instability, even more instability in the area.
God, what a time to be alive.
It was. There was a boycott of the Olympics that was held in Moscow in 1980. So it was terribly dangerous time. Relatively suddenly, you know, there was it all just sort of went out of control. And I suppose, as you've already alluded to, it's a similar kind of thing to we're experiencing now.
Yeah.
And you know, for people our age, I was 12-ish in 1980. Me and you and our generations, you know, were pretty much convinced there was going to be a nuclear war at any time because of this backdrop. And the thing that always sticks in my mind, because it kind of goes through kind of relationships with your parents. I'm sure most parents would have been saying, "Oh, don't worry about it," and things like that. But a few years after this, not long after this, there was an incident where a Korean airline got shot down by the Russians. Mm-hmm. And there was a news flash. And for any kids in the audience, news flashes, you didn't have continuous news in those days. If there was a news flash around this period and a caption would come up, you sat up and listened, because you were constantly thinking it was going to be either one of the IRA hunger strikers had died, or there was going to be a nuclear war. And in this case, it was about the Korean airliner being shot down. And I remember looking across to my dad, and my dad looking across at me, and he wasn't issuing any comforting words at all. You could tell that he was as absolutely shit scared as I was at this point. There was an incident called Able Archer. There was a simulation of what would happen if there was a nuclear war, which the Russians actually thought was real momentarily. Probably the lowest point in the Cold War.
We came very close then, didn't we?
Very close indeed. And that's really exactly the backdrop that Whoops Apocalypse is both parodying but also being fueled by.
Yeah, this is perfect fuel for a sitcom, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Now, the way this sitcom comes about is quite a strange story, and I think we need to start with Humphrey Barclay, who was at the time the head of comedy at London Weekend Television.
I should say straight away, if you're interested in the background and LWT and you haven't already listened to it, then our podcast, Don't Drink the Water, goes into this in some detail. But Humphrey Barclay was a producer, started on radio and produced a much-loved comedy show called I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again, which amongst other people had some of the goodies, in fact, all of the goodies, I think, and also John Cleese. He then went onto television and did a programme that was on in the children's slot called Do Not Adjust Your Set with Terry Jones and Michael Palin, and the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band were on it as well. And Terry Gilliam, I think, wasn't he? Yes, I think Terry Gilliam was involved in it as well. So it was really one of the formative things to do with Python alongside At Last, the 1948 show. It was much beloved by adults who were watching it with their kids, which is quite important in relation to Marshall and Renwick. He also was involved in creating and helping to manage the Doctor series on LWT. And quite a few of the early episodes of that were written by people like John Cleese and Graham Chapman, Bill Oddie and Graham Garden. And in fact, one of the episodes about a rude hotel owner was suggested by Barclay would make a good subject for a sitcom. And of course, that led to Fawlty Towers. So he was head of comedy, and there was a move really in LWT towards the late 70s of having Sunday night shows, not necessarily at 10 o'clock, but not, after 9, that were quite controversial. And one really sticks out, which is quite an unusual show called Agony. Do you remember that?
Maureen Lipman.
Yeah, Maureen Lipman. She was an agony aunt, and the first series was co-written by real-life agony aunt Anna Rayburn. And it was really close to the knuckle with its content. I seem to remember one episode involves people quite blithely talking about acting in hardcore porn films. And there's a joke at the end that basically is a bestiality joke.
And this is Sunday night.
Sunday night, LWT. It's unsurprising that Barclay saw the potential merits of a nuclear war sitcom.
He was a big fan of a radio show called The Burkiss Way, satirical radio show.
Yeah.
That was written by Andrew Marshall and David Renwick. I think Douglas Adams also wrote for it as well, didn't he?
Yeah, there were quite a few people who wrote for it. I mean, Marshall and Renwick started off, as did Douglas Adams, as did countless people, working on a sketch show called Weekending, which was ubiquitous kind of for years, and Weekending was the way in, really. So they started working on that, and then they got their own show, The Burkiss Way, and it's very, very Python. It's very Python.
Surreal.
It's surreal, but it plays with the format. It has false endings. There's one episode that ends mid-sentence, and it gets increasingly bizarre as it goes on. And a lot of the people at the BBC weren't too keen on it because it did go quite close to the bone. It had, I think, was it its last episode that featured a lot of stuff slagging off the coverage of the Queen Mother's birthday. Struggling to remember that when it was repeated once, they just edited all that out and just had guitar music playing. It's a really interesting show, The Burkiss Way. Very funny. It's not afraid. It had some sketches in it that were later adapted for TV programs. But you also had, they took the piss out of Douglas Adams quite a lot because he was their friend. And famously, of course, Douglas Adams claimed to have based Marvin the Paranoid Android on Andrew Marshall. But there are lots of jokes about it. There's a parody of Hitchhikers in there as well.
The Scriptwriter's Guide to the Galaxy, isn't it?
Scriptwriter's Guide to the Galaxy, and Peter Jones comes onto the Burkiss Way in form of the book. And obviously he's important later as well.
Yeah, and like you say, some of these sketches did end up on TV eventually. They wrote sketches for Not in the 9 o'clock news, and one of the most famous sketches from that show, the gramophone shop sketch, was originally on the Burkiss Way with Fred Harris playing the Rowan Atkinson role.
Well, I wonder if you could help me. I want to buy a gramophone.
A what?
A gramophone.
Gramophone? We don't do gramophones, Dad.
What's that then, there?
That's a stereo record deck.
Oh, well, what's the difference between that and a gramophone?
30 years and a plastic cover.
And they also wrote sketches for people like the Two Ronnies. The most famous sketch they did was the famous Mastermind sketch.
In your first heat, your chosen subject was answering questions before they were asked. This time, you have chosen to answer the question before last each time. Is that correct?
Charlie Smithers.
Some of those sketches were written, on their own. I think that one is a Renwick one, isn't it? The Mastermind sketch.
Yeah, and a big fan of the Burkiss Way was Humphrey Barclay, and he asked Renwick and Marshall to pitch some ideas to him for a show, and that show ended up being what we now call End of Part 1, which is a brilliant title for a TV show, by the way.
Yes, it is. And it was a brilliant show.
Was it a kids' show? I mean, it was in a kids' time slot.
This is one of the interesting things. It goes down to the bind that people had when they were a weekend-only TV station. Because at the time, LWT started at 7 on a Friday evening. I think later, some point after this, it started at 5:15. But that necessarily limited your sort of peak time or post 9 o'clock, kind of post Watershed, times when you could actually put things on. They always put a drama on at 9 o'clock on a Friday. Saturday was the big night that they had to compete with the BBC, largely to no avail. And so where do you actually put this on? And they never intended it to be a kids' show. And actually, if you watch it, it's definitely not a kids' show because of the fact that it also parodies programs that kids would not be watching. It was just one of these things that they plopped it in there. And I suppose the most significant comparison, especially with Humphrey Barclay involved, is Do Not Adjust Your Set, which transcended the sort of children's audience because of the content. And he didn't sort of pitch it down to kids. But it was a kids' show, whereas I don't think End of Part 1 really ever was. It just ended up in a very odd slot because 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon was like about as death a slot as you could possibly imagine, which was great when I was a kid because you'd suddenly turn on this program. You think, what on earth is going on here? And it was absolutely fantastic.
Doctor Who fans will be very familiar with this program, probably because they've seen the sketch, which famously lampoons Tom Baker's era, starring Fred Harris as Dr. Eyes.
Dr. Eyes, indeed. And the thing is, I can be fond of some of the things it's parodying. You know, I can still enjoy the parody massively because they're so funny. I mean, there's a brilliant Call My Bluff parody called Scrape My Barrel, which is particularly good. Probably one of the best episodes is the Nation Trite parody, which has just got some amazingly good things in it.
Set during World War III.
Set during World War III, treating World War III in covering it in the same way as a general election.
With individual deaths reported.
Yes. We've lost Richmond. It's that kind of thing. And it's got this brilliant little sketch, which is so, I mean, it's no surprise that Armando Iannucci really liked End of Part 1 because there are so many things that could get picked up and developed on in the day-to-day. There's a great sketch with the Mike Dada where it's just a man walking down the street doing a kind of report, but he never uses any words. He just does it in that terrible rhythm that reporters have. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. It's impeccable and brilliant work from David Simeon, Alistair Ferguson, The Demons. And again, I just think, and I've said this to a few friends of ours, David Simeon carried on acting, but why the hell didn't he just become a genius comedy performer? Because he's brilliant. He does a one-man Enoch Powell party, which is a brilliantly directed sketch, as well as being a brilliantly performed sketch. It's such a great show.
Da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da. Da. Da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. Da. Da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da.
That report there by Dillis Trivia and Mike Dada.
I watched that episode today and there was a bit where they said later on tonight the Nolan sisters are going to pick up their microphones and perform a viewer request and then they'll sing a song. And I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
4 o'clock on a Sunday, Jesus.
It's a wonderful show. But of course, it caused a big kind of, it didn't last that long, but it caused a bit of a rupture between Marshall Rennick and Barclay, but also LWT. They refused to make any more, basically, after the second series.
Because of the time slot.
Because of the time slot. And that got a huge amount of publicity because it got nominated for BAFTA and an International Emmy. It got more coverage for that than it did for the fact, whenever it was on, apart from a few TV critics who really championed it. And Michael Grade was forced to defend the decision-making process, and it just became a bit of a furore, but they just wouldn't do any more. And it broke up a very promising team, as I've said, David Simeon, Fred Harris, and others, just a terrific team and some great sketches, really great sketches. And it was a shame.
I'm surprised they did the second series after they knew what happened for the first series. And I got the impression in the second series they were really trying to push it as far as they can go.
Definitely. They have a whole thing of a premiere, which has got Lou Grade with an enormously long cigar that goes up kind of several staircases. And they are just putting the boot into absolutely everything to do with TV. It's a glorious thing, the second series. And it's also, they changed the format. And it's actually the second series that is produced by Humphrey Barclay, because the first series was Simon Brett, I think, who produced The Berkey's Way on the radio. It's such a great show, but they went off in high dudgeon from it. All the time this was happening, they were writing sketches and jokes for really mainstream comedians. They wrote for Jim Davidson, 321. Chris Emmett was in 321, who was also in The Burkiss Way. Bruce Forsyth, Cannon and Ball. They went on to do There's a Lot of It About for Spike Milligan and wrote quite a lot for that, but he didn't use an awful lot. But they got on very well with Spike Milligan. So there was lots of odd stuff there. But then they were so angry at the children's TV thing. I don't think they liked the fact that it was perceived as children's TV, end of part one. So they basically thought to themselves, well, what's the most adult kind of extreme theme that we can think of? And that was Whoops Apocalypse.
And they were so annoyed with LWT, they actually went to the BBC to pitch this idea.
They did go to the BBC. Maybe just at this point, we should mention that the DVD release of Whoops Apocalypse comes with Jonathan Sloman's epic PDF booklet about the background to the making of Whoops Apocalypse and indeed the film version, which we'll talk about later. So, it's very useful when we're doing this podcast. So hats off to Jonathan for that. Yeah, they took it to the great John Howard Davis at the BBC. And he knew their background and reputation and was keen to look at what they were going to produce. And they were very happy, wrote a quite long pilot episode. And really the only thing that could stand in their way is if John Howard Davis didn't like it. And he didn't.
He hated it.
He thought it was heavy-handed and childish, is an exact quote. And he particularly didn't like the Johnny Cyclops character, which is the obvious parody played by Barry Morse, the obvious parody of Reagan. God knows what he thought of Spitting Image a few years later with The President's Brain is Missing. But no, he didn't like that. So basically, they had to swallow their pride and they went back to LWT.
And Humphrey Barclay took it on, not only because he liked it, but also because he felt guilty about the whole end of part one fiasco.
Yeah, I think the quote is, it was a gesture of atonement.
Yeah.
For the end of part one debacle. But he did love them as a writing pair and he wanted to back them.
So the director of this, John Reardon, what was he most famous for?
He was a sort of kind of a House, Thames and LWT director. He directed a lot of drama. He directed cop shows like New Scotland Yard. He'd done a lot of the post 9 o'clock Sunday night sitcoms like Two's Company, Agony. He later did the Richard O'Sullivan vehicle, Me and My Girl. What's interesting, I think, is he's incredibly experienced guy at making VT, a drama and sitcoms. But with Whoops Apocalypse, and we'll certainly get onto this, is one of the reasons he paced the show so fast, and it is remarkably fast, I think, Whoops Apocalypse, because he didn't want to lose any of the dialogue. So he kind of went hell for leather going at such a rattle that they didn't kind of have to cut the script short.
Should we talk about the cast? Because it's a huge cast, and should we talk about some of the characters they play in this thing?
There are a lot of characters. There are a good sort of 5 or 6 sort of sets and threads to it all. And it was an expensive show, partly because of the big cast, but also because of the location filming and things like that.
The main guy, I suppose, is Johnny Cyclops, played by Barry Morse, of all people, who's not even American.
No, but he'd gone over to America early, hadn't he? And he got the famous role as the detective hunting David Jansen in The Fugitive. And so he became really famous and much hated in America, apparently. He said he could always tell when a new country had started watching The Fugitive because he'd get hate mail from another country.
We know him from Space 1999.
There's something about Barry Morse. There's something quite lovable about Barry Morse. And Space 1999 loses its heart when he goes out of it.
Absolutely.
And in every other respect, Johnny Cyclops is terrible and really stupid and dangerous. But because it's Barry Morse, he kind of becomes almost sympathetic.
Yeah, so he's the American president. Like you say, he's not evil. He's just stupid because he's being manipulated by the Deacon, played by John Barron, a sort of fundamentalist Christian nationalist who crucifies people on the White House lawn.
For the Easter decorations, yes.
Now, he would have been most known, I guess, for Reginald Perrin at this point.
They obviously must have loved Reggie Perrin because the fact that the Deacon, like CJ, has little catchphrases, doesn't he? And it's obviously kind of referring to that. And it's sick minds, Mr. President, is particularly great. It is a great line. So, yeah, it's the thing that's interesting about that is that Alexander Haig, who was one of the advisors to Reagan, was called by White House staff, was called the Vicar. The thing is that apparently Renwick and Marshall had no clue about that at all.
Holy hell, shit. Sir, if the Lord had meant us to have faith in geriatrics, he would never have given us the Supreme Court. Time is short, Mr. President. You'll have to do the broadcast live. That'll be all, thank you, gentlemen. As you can see, the President is in full control of the situation. Emergency communion will be held in the chapel, 6 o'clock.
So you've got the Americans on the one hand, then you've got the Russians on the other. They're encapsulated by Richard Griffiths, and he's obviously playing a Brezhnev type who keeps dying and then is replaced by an identical version of himself. Now, when I watched it again recently, I thought, oh, this must be because all the Russian leaders were dying all the time, but they weren't, were they? They just looked like they were dying.
My memory of this is that there were constant rumours that Brezhnev was dead because of the fact that he'd just not be seen for ages. The thing about Brezhnev was that he'd go missing for ages. No one would see him. Everybody would assume he was dead. He probably was at that time in hospital being treated, and he was virtually in a coma towards the end of his life. But they'd like wheel him out, and that's what they sort of do in the programme. He's sort of wheeled out stiffly. It's a great thing to have in the first episode as a running gag. It's just a brilliant moment when they just wheel out another one.
When the World War comes, all neutral countries will have same options as that piece of steak. Rare, medium, or well done. Neutral countries are no friends of Russia. Neutral countries keep secrets from us.
Of course, after Whoops Apocalypse, when Brezhnev did die, Andropov died, and then Shinnyenko died really quickly. They actually did just keep dying, so it kind of kept the gag going.
Also, in the Russian side of things is the Alexei Sayle character, who plays a member of the KGB. It's a very broad performance, shall we say.
It is. But again, it has a great running gag that he's called Commissar Solzhenitsyn. No relation. No relation.
Apparently, he shaved his head, particularly for this role, so he could wear a wig, and then kept that as his trademark later.
Yeah, some critics picked up on Alexei Sayle. Just like I just think it adds to the pot, the whole goulash of this crazy program, basically, to have such a broad performance in there.
I am Commissar Solzhenitsyn. No relation. Now, I may as well tell you, Mr. and Mrs. Hopper, that your government has admitted your shabby connections with the CIA and has handed you over to the KGB for such treatment as we might consider appropriate.
You tell what it says in the papers?
No. You have seen the newspapers?
Yep.
They ordered continental breakfast.
And then we've got the British government, which is my favourite.
Oh, God, brilliant.
And the British Prime Minister, who's a Labour Prime Minister, is played by Peter Jones. He plays Kevin Pork. And Kevin Pork has a secret.
The truth of it is, I am secretly Superman.
I don't really know where to start with this. The fact that he's called Kevin Pork is brilliant. The fact that he's brilliantly supported by two great comic actors, Richard Davis, who plays the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Geoffrey Palmer, who plays the Foreign Secretary.
They're based on Roy Jenkins and David Owen, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Pork himself is very Roy Jenkins as well. So they're all wearing identical kind of really boring grey suits, aren't they? There's the kind of everything about the British stuff is just so brilliant. It's just outstanding. And I think the scene where Pork reveals his secret, you can see Richard Davis trying not to laugh. You can genuinely see him trying not to laugh because it's just so astonishingly funny. The fact that he's called Kevin Pork and the fact that they refer to him as Kev is really, really funny. But also it's a way that from that point on, when he addresses them, he says boys and girls. And it's done so casually that you don't necessarily even notice it at first, but it just becomes unbelievably funny because it's astonishingly good.
What's amazing about it is that all the references to DC Comics are all comic accurate. There's no making this stuff up. There's references to Brainiac, Earth 2. But the best gag in the entire program, I think, is when he comes in with Crypto the dog.
Yes. When he says, I'm just going to take Crypto for his morning fly around the block and throws the dog out of the window, I don't think I've heard an audience lose their mind as much in a sitcom as they do then. It's like they're tearing their clothes off.
Two members of the audience who might have been there laughing at that point is actually Lenny Henry and Dawn French.
Yes.
That's apparently where they met and hooked up.
They hooked up, they kind of went off and couldn't stop talking to each other. Something magical happened, and that was because they were invited by Alexis Sale. Speaking of superhero references, another brilliant character on this is Ed Bishop's newsreader, who's called Jay Garrick.
The Flash.
The Flash. Yeah, I had no clue. I only read that recently.
And he mentions Aquaman, I think, in the very first line of dialogue he has. There's DC references
really?
everywhere. Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's absolutely
And at the end, when
brilliant.
Jeffrey Palmer appears as Hawkman, he says, "I'm from the planet Thanagor." Yeah, that's exactly
Is
right.
that accurate as well?
Yes.
It's
all accurate.
Saudi Arabia, the revolt by fanatical Muslims which has toppled the country's royal family continues. This week, the new Revolutionary Council began a major purge of all pro-Western revisionists who have persistently failed to observe the strictures of Islamic law. Sheikh Wanjid El Shadri, publicly flogged for miming to a Joe Cocker record during Ramadan. Hitchat Ben Faisal, former Minister for Oil, sentenced to death for entering a mosque on a unicycle and referring to the Prophet Muhammad as spats. And Suraf El Khalid, formally executed for keeping a photograph of Ernest Borgnine in his Quran and later appearing on the streets of Mecca dressed as Aquaman. To cope with the ever-increasing tensions in the Middle East, the United States has now placed its rapid deployment forces at nearby Diego Garcia on a full condition blue alert.
I mean, other characters that we have, of course, and this led to Barclay put a big exclamation mark against this because they introduced into the LWT version the Shah of Iran's brother. Barclay was thinking, really? Because the Shah was, had been
mass murderer,
a mass murderer, a hideous secret service called what they called the Sarvik, I think, who murdered many, many people. And he thought, where are the laughs going to be in this? So they made him his brother, didn't they, rather than his son? Was that right? I think it was something.
He doesn't
like
look Iranian at all, does
No,
he?
he does not. But then neither does David Kelly look whatever David Kelly's supposed to be, who plays his assistant Abdab.
He's the funniest character in it, I think, even though I feel terrible for laughing at it. It's so bad on so many different levels.
Rest easy, oh Planet of the Apes.
That running gag is brilliant. He keeps dropping in lines from films. Oh, Last of the Mohicans.
The Shah plotline is completely insane.
Yeah.
And he's being expelled from France. And I still use this expression when terrible things happen to people. Charles Kay plays the French ambassador who sees him off with La cérémonie de grosse humiliation. And so when terrible things happen to people in a public eye, I often find myself saying La cérémonie de grosse humiliation. And they flick butter onto him from asparagus and do this kind. And it's just very, very good. But he ends up trapped on a cross-channel ferry.
Yeah, on a P&O ferry.
In the toilets.
Which is stormed by the SAS.
The storming by the SAS is another one. Certainly when I was at school, that episode, so much happens in that episode 2. When the SAS storm and basically kill each other and don't find the Shah, and they just scream their heads off, and it's Pteroleptil leader Michael Melia, isn't it, who plays the leader of the SAS. It's just hysterically funny. And there's so much going on in the episode, you just don't know where you are from one minute to the next. It's so hysterical. And then you've got the bit where the Shah changes clothes, and Abdab, of course, we've not mentioned that Abdab constantly wears a blindfold because he's not allowed to look at the countenance of His Excellency. And he throws all of his clothes away by mistake out of a porthole and then dresses him in a sort of indescribable sort of Ollie Hardy style green suit with a waistcoat that's too tight.
It looks like Toad from Wind in the Willows.
It's just another great touch thrown in there, and that whole storyline is completely demented.
Thousand apologies, Scott of the Antarctic.
Will you take off that blindfold?
But then I would catch sight of your holy countenance and have to pluck out my eyes with a pair of sugar tongs.
And another thing.
Master.
Scott of the Antarctic was a film with Kenneth Moore. If only you hadn't lost those seasickness pills. Now there is nothing at all I can take. Nothing.
You are wrong, Master.
What?
It was John Mills. Scott of the Antarctic with John Mills.
We haven't even mentioned probably the most significant character, which is Lacrobat.
Played by John Cleese, of all people.
Yeah.
How did they get hold of him?
Humphrey Barclay had obviously got a long connection with Cleese. Cleese had got into the state then. He just, what other worlds had he to conquer in terms of sitcom? He'd just done the second series of Fawlty Towers with, 4 or 5 year gap between the two, to much acclaim and, laudatory critical reviews. He entered that kind of thing that people often refer to as his lazy period, where basically he couldn't really be bothered to do much. But in the case of Whoops Apocalypse, he liked the script, but also, apart from one tiny scene, it's all on film, his stuff. So he was basically pretty much on his own. He didn't really interact with many actors. It's like a one-man piece, isn't it? There's a brief interaction with Nicky Henson, who was also in Fawlty Towers, Pretentious Moi, who ends up getting frozen to death in a giant ice block.
He plays several different characters in 3 episodes.
Yeah, L'Acrobat is like a super criminal, assassin / super criminal, who's employed by the Deacon to steal back one of the quark bombs, formerly known as the Johnny Cyclops bomb, after the president of the same name. And L'Acrobat's kind of shtick seems to be that he looks as conspicuous as possible, wearing ridiculous kind of outfits. Anybody that conspicuous can't possibly be the person that they're after. So he has the missile, the quark bomb. I was going to say formerly known, but I won't do it every time. He has the quark bomb on the back of a van disguised as a penis. It's really just a John Cleese show for those bits, isn't it?
I was once paid to watch Whoops Apocalypse. When I worked for ITV Subtitles, I had to subtitle episode 5. I think it's the episode where John Cleese's character is on the ferry and he's talking in like a Wurzel's accent, and I couldn't understand a fucking thing he was saying. And the laughter track over the top of it made it doubly difficult. It was the worst day of work I ever had.
I think that happens with quite a lot of those L'Acrobat location scenes. The laughter does drown out an awful lot of what's being said. The mix is quite weird, I think.
Not just me, then.
No, it's not just you at all.
Oh, Soddy's Jolly Jungle and Sea Lion Circus, sir. And you are Mr. Soddy. Gabriel Garfield Soddy, sir. A Spiller, Stetson, Snellgrove, Iplash, Soddy and Gob, sir. Zoo kids and taught for over 200 years. Not ashamed of it. What's wrong with a bit of dung?
I guess we should also mention a much smaller role, but a memorable one, again in episode 2. Rick Mail comes in as this kind of taciturn loon, but it led to that joke, which I've already mentioned, which I still, again, is something that I still reference and a mate of mine constantly reference, which is the president is nervous about the bomb being called the most destructive bomb of all time, being called the Johnny Cyclops bomb. So they rename it the Quark Bomb, formerly known as the Johnny Cyclops Bomb. And they have quite a good song as well, which is the Johnny Cyclops Never Started World War III. So you got a song in that episode as well.
It's insane, isn't it, really?
It is, and I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because at the time, they were doing a lot of shiny floor light entertainment shows like 321 and things like that. And this is just bish, bash, bosh, totally crazy how much stuff there is going on in it.
Did you watch it when it went out? I was too young.
Absolutely. I would have firebombed my own home if they'd not let me stay up and watch this. And also, this was the trick. I can't remember if it was actually on after Whoops Apocalypse, but I played the old South Bank Show card quite a lot. Educational.
Okay, yes.
Educational.
Did it work?
And they were always suckers for that. Claudius, it's educational. When I was about 9. That was the card that I played.
Fantastic. I think I saw it a couple of years later. Didn't Channel 4 repeat it?
Yeah, Channel 4 definitely repeated it, yeah.
So the plot basically follows the events that leads up to the apocalypse. I think John Cleese blows up Israel, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's right. They blow up Israel. The Deacon's trying to get the quark bomb back, and L'Acrobat successfully gets it, but then he loses it, and there's a military man's about to be cremated, and there's a terrible mix-up with the coffins, essentially. And just as they are about to stop that happening, the quark bomb going into the crematorium, John Cleese turns up on a motorbike. Well, obviously it's not John Cleese, so he's not really in the last episode. This happens brilliantly. This happens right at the start of episode 6, which is a great way of starting the episode. And he basically catapults in on a motorbike, lands on the coffin, which then goes into the crematorium and annihilates Israel.
And at the same time, the Shah of Iran is on the space shuttle.
Yes,
because of course he is.
Because that's where that storyline goes. From a cross-channel ferry in the SAS to them being on the space shuttle, and of course Abdab being unable to see, ejecting the crew and then crashing the space shuttle into Moscow.
And then Moscow launched their nukes.
The thing is that I don't know about you, but even though we were living in that moment where we thought we might get wiped out, I wanted to watch anything to do with nuclear war. I lapped it up. It was quite weird, actually. I was desperate to watch anything.
Was there a lot out then? This seems very early for this.
No, there were quite a few. The one that Jonathan Sloman mentions, which isn't particularly distinguished, but there was a big mini-series called World War III with David Soul and Rock Hudson. There were historic ones from around the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I was lapping up everything I could find about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was quite weird, really. I suppose it's a way of dealing with it. I remember having chats with friends saying, I remember one guy I knew at school, he wasn't the brightest, where he was saying, oh, I'll just dig a hole in the garden and get in the hole. And it was just like, yeah, I don't think that's really going to cut it.
I remember them doing the test of the siren. I don't know what the benefit of it was. It's not like you could do anything.
Exactly. It's just such a strange program, What's Apocalypse? It really is.
Strange doesn't begin to cover it.
No. Tonally, there's nothing like it, and it's hard to believe there could ever be anything made quite in the same way.
I loved it, but there are moments where you think, Jesus Christ. I mean, even back then, it must have been a little bit shocking. I mean, there's a lot of nudity. Well, actually, there's not a lot. There's one particular part, which just comes out of nowhere.
It does, and the audience lose their minds again. The audience lose their minds twice. Basically, there's a start of news at 10. And bearing in mind, this is the uncomfortable bit about it, bearing in mind that only comparatively recently had there started to become women newsreaders.
Mm-hmm.
So famously Angela Rippon, Anna Ford doing ITN on ITV. And there's the start of news at 10, and it's got some classic Not the 9 o'clock news style gags that are coming in on that. And then it cuts to the newsreader, and it's topless woman. I think the thing about that is it's a gag about, a lot of things, but looking back through the newspaper clippings, there's a very weird thing that Chris Dunkley of the Financial Times, who I always used to think was quite a good TV critic, but he's talking about this was a great gag because it shows, we actually, can like their bodies just like we like their minds. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? So it's almost like, it's a sort of, what is it saying that there's some women newsreaders around, so we'll have a joke with them being topless. But I think the biggest thing that comes out of this program is that there aren't any women characters in it. That's the bit that I find uncomfortable.
The blacking up of Abdab and all of that, although he is so funny.
He is very funny, and doesn't Lacrobat black up at one point? The thing is, it's designed to, they want to be, as they said, they want to be as extreme and non-children's TV as you can possibly be about that. But I mean, it got an absolute mauling from some people, it really did. And did you see which was the sort of TV review program? They'd look back, BBC Two, Ludovic Kennedy would look back on programs from the week, and they really put the boot in, including Ludovic Kennedy, which is interesting because he's almost like the impartial chair of three people. And he put the boot in and basically said the only comedy it has to be lacking in taste, it has to be crude, it has to be vulgar, and he wrote in OTT and a couple of other shows. So that seemed to sort of spark a bit of a roll with people. There were lots of religious kind of figures protesting about the program. And then, of course, the other thing which, made its future a bit uncertain at the time was that the Falklands War broke out after the first episode.
I'm surprised they didn't pull the rest of the series, given that.
Well, it must have been a really close run thing, because lots and lots of programs anyway kind of close to touching on things like the Falklands War did get postponed and suspended, including Frankie Howard sitcom, which got postponed because of that. What was it called? What Did You Do in the War? I can't remember what it was called now.
I'm surprised they kept transmitting it. Humphrey Barclay loved it, though, didn't he?
He did. And also, I think Michael Gray, just before he left, there's a quote that he said to Humphrey Barclay, I don't really see much in this program, but you're the head of comedy and you've got that glint in your eye. I could say bad things about Michael Gray, how long have you got? But that kind of world is a really interesting world where people stuck to their guns about things, regardless of what they thought necessarily about the quality of the piece itself.
Think of the power and the glory, sir. We put the first batch of Johnny Cyclops bombs into full deployment just as the primaries begin. I announce these glad tidings coast to coast on my Texaco Complan Hour of Salvation. Suddenly you're back in the race.
Yeah, but if one of those things accidentally went off, it could blow up an entire state. I mean, think of the risk.
We have, sir. That's why we're sighting them in Europe.
Well, I
There's a kind of like, we'll put everything out there for this program, I think, isn't it? It's just, there's such an energy about it. They must have realized that this is kind of like slightly weird one-off opportunity.
Yeah, there was never going to be a second series.
Well,
clearly.
exactly. A one-shot sitcom is really quite unusual, isn't it? To have where there's no real future in it, literally. There were a lot of people who liked it as well. But it's interesting because the famous bit was in the Mail, Herbert Kretzmer, who later became quite, very well off as a lyricist because he co-wrote Les Miserables. He liked the first episode, and then after the Did You See, sort of said, yes, actually, I don't like it. It was kind of, I am always a fan of programs that you've really never seen anything quite like it and probably never will again with this. Everybody was talking about it at school the next day because it was kind of like shocking, and it was just great. So I'm very fond of it for that reason. But I do think it stands up. It's just so odd not to have any speaking women characters in it.
There was a spin-off book as well, wasn't there?
I was fairly surprised, but I now possess it and will be writing about it for our newsletter.
Is it good?
I'm quite fond of it already, simply because it really reminds me of that time when you used to get things like the Not the 9 O'Clock News book and the Young Ones book. I know that Ben Elton always used to say that people complain there wasn't a third series of the Young Ones, but the book is the third series of the Young Ones because it's all new content. It's very much of an excuse for a lot of satirical comments. So there's some very funny jokes about Clive James in there, for one thing, and it's just Marshall and Renwick taking the piss out of it and everything, basically. So yeah, you could probably pick it up for about £4. It's not a rare item.
I suppose one of the weirdest things about this TV programme is that it spun off into a film.
Now then, Whoops Apocalypse, successful TV series, right? A satire on the madness of war. Well, now the original writers, Andrew Marshall and David Renwick, have turned the idea into a feature film, which is all about a British task force setting off to reclaim sovereign territory that's been invaded by a hostile force. Well, of course, this is just a movie. Nothing like that could possibly happen, you understand. So anyway, in this movie version, uninspired by anything that ever actually took place, Loretta Swit plays the President of the United States and Peter Cook is Britain's Prime Minister.
It's a strange story, really, isn't it? Because somebody watched the series and thought, wow, this would be much better if it was a film.
Brian Eastman, I think it was.
But it took an inordinate amount of time to get made, didn't it?
It's nothing like the TV show. There's very, very few similarities. There's one character that crosses over, and that's it, and that's Lacrobat. Not played by John Cleese.
No, Lacrobat played by Michael Richards from Seinfeld. I mean, I watched it for the first time. I never got around to watching it before. I watched it for the first time this weekend, and I really, really did not like it.
Really?
No, I didn't. I didn't like it at all. And it's quite admirable that they went a completely, not a completely different direction. They effectively changed most of the storyline. They bring in the SAS attack, don't they, towards the end, and they bring Rick Mail back as the leader of the SAS, and some of the dialogue is the same.
Right! Once you get inside...
Please, Sarge, can I bring the tiger?
No, you can't bring the fucking tiger, Donald! It's more trouble than it's worth! You leave it in the van! Oh!
In the TV series, an SAS guy gets his leg caught in a toilet door. They take a saw, and he goes over and starts to saw his leg off. And in the TV show, they say, oh, don't do that, don't do that. And in the film, they do saw his leg off.
It's got a great cast.
It's got a great cast. It's got Peter Cook playing the Prime Minister, who's mad in a very different way to the Peter Jones character. But there was something a bit...
Didn't have the same energy, did it? It was quite flat.
Well, it certainly hasn't got the same energy. Flat's the word. Almost airless, I think. It's like...
There are moments where it comes to life.
There are.
I mean, particularly Peter Cook, when he's talking about the Pixies being responsible for unemployment, is a great moment.
Yeah, and it's got a good performance from Ian Richardson, I think, in it as well. The main differences is, ironically, considering the Falklands War kicked off after the first episode of the TV series, there's a massive Falklands War strand in it. The entire plot is based around Falklands War type event, but also a sort of weird combining of Princess Diana and Prince Andrew in the figure of Princess Wendy, who's actually in the task force, which is like the Falklands task force, and ends up getting kidnapped.
I think what sums it up is the Lacrobat performance is just so poor compared to John Cleese. And I think that comparison sums up the difference between those two pieces of work. I'm surprised they didn't change the title and just call it something else.
Yeah, because it's not exactly like it was cashing in on anything worldwide, would it be? Because it's not like it's not like the TV program had any kind of recognition outside of the UK.
One good thing did come out of it is that Alexis Sale's in it, and apparently Marshall and Renwick and Alexis Sale, when they were filming in Miami, that's when they decided to work together on future projects, which we'll maybe talk about in a minute.
I'm glad I saw it finally, but it's just, and weirdly, Renwick and Marshall, or Marshall and Renwick, depending on how we're doing it, both seem to think that they like it more than the TV series. I find that baffling, to be honest.
Because we all know what really causes unemployment in this country, don't we, gentlemen? Unemployment in this country is caused by pixies. I don't mean the nice ordinary ones who sit on toadstools playing a whistle. I'm talking about the nasty, evil, malevolent pixies The tiny green ones with the black pointy beards who go around our factories, and we've all seen them, who go around our factories casting their wicked spells and bringing about mass redundancies on a scale not witnessed since the Great Depression.
So, John, if anyone wants to watch Whoops Apocalypse and they haven't seen it already, where can they do so?
Well, the original TV series is unfortunately quite pricey second-hand now, but you can watch it on YouTube. You can forgive slightly dodgy quality, but the film is available on Blu-ray and DVD for quite affordable prices.
So what happened to Renwick and Marshall after this?
Vanished without a trace. Well, together, they continued to make some. You've just mentioned the fact that they had a great working relationship with Alexis Sale, and they did a brilliant TV series with him called Alexis Sale's Stuff.
I remember that so vividly, the Juliet Bravo thing, I still think about to this day.
Yeah, I showed a friend that. He'd never seen it before, only the other month. And it is the most deadpan opening of any TV program ever. And it basically is a lost episode of Juliet Bravo, isn't it? It's a brilliant program, a totally brilliant program. And he's sadly quite hard to get hold of now. Again, a silly money kind of show, which is a shame. They then did another show that I'm very fond of, which didn't last very long, which is called the Steam Video Company, which is, again, it's kind of like low budget spoofs of TV programs. Again, I think there's a Nationwide spoof in that. They're obviously obsessed with Nationwide. But it's got William Franklin from the Schweppes adverts, Barry Cryer, Bob Todd of all people, and I think Jimmy Mulville, Anna Dawson. It's just lots of mugging to the camera and working with double entendres and stuff. And I really, really liked it as a kid. And I've seen it comparatively recently. And it still stands up. It wasn't popular, wasn't a hit. They did a peculiar sitcom called If You See God Tell Him.
Is that Richard Briers?
Richard Briers, Aid Edmondson. And it got horribly delayed because I think they wanted to direct it or something like that for Channel 4. And it ended up coming onto the BBC in the early 90s. And it's 4 parts. It was not really going anywhere. But if you want to laugh and you don't mind being spoiled, look up the Wikipedia synopsis of the series. And it sounds like genuinely the maddest program you've ever watched. I remember in the last episode, Richard Briers starts doing an autopsy on someone. Yeah, it's an extraordinary show. They had a sort of amicable parting, as lots of those kind of double kind of writers used to do, like Norden and Muir. You know, in the end, they just run out of kind of steam or want to do their own things. And the own thing that David Renwick wanted to do was One Foot in the Grave. Started in the late 80s, ran throughout the 90s, basically, didn't it? It was swept all before it. 2.4 Children was what Andrew Marshall kind of came to success with. That ran multiple series, very popular show. Both those programs, by the way, featuring really good women characters, lead characters. And Renwick also went on to do Jonathan Creek, which was another massive success. And Marshall did a few others. Dad, what was it, Health and Efficiency. Maybe not quite as successful as 2.4 Children.
Yeah,
but
hell of a CV though, yeah.
Yeah, amazing pair of writers. And just all the sketch stuff they did from the 70s right through to the sort of 2010s and beyond. Just there all the time. Really amazing writers.
So what are we doing next time, John?
Well, it will be our Christmas and New Year specials. It's going to be a surprise present to you, our faithful listeners.
So if you don't want to miss that, make sure you like and subscribe to this podcast so you're informed of when it drops. So we're hoping to get it out the week before Christmas. It's going to be very exciting. Place your bets now. What could we possibly be doing? And until next time, I've been Neil.
And I've been John.
And you've been listening to The World of Telly.
Aujourd'hui, nous sommes ici pour assister à une cérémonie de grosse humiliation.